In this video I will be discussing a possible option to transform any lens you own into a near macro lens, and that accessory is an Achromat close-up lens filter. Now, by lens filter, that's strictly not true because it's not actually a lens filter. Think of it more as a magnifying glass for your lens. And what this allows you to do is essentially focus closer to your subject to achieve a near macro reproduction. Now, it's not too dissimilar to using extension tubes, but the problem with extension tubes is a lot of faffing going on, that you have to remove the lens from the body, put the extension tubes on and put the lens then onto the extension tubes. And the beauty of this thing is it essentially just screws right onto the front of your lens, just like any lens filter would. But definitely don't think of this as a close-up lens filter, because it isn't. This is an extra piece of glass that you just attach to your lens. So the easiest way for me to demonstrate what this actually means in real world usage is first of all to take a shot without the Achromat close-up lens fitted. So I'm using my 28 to 200mm zoom lens. I'm at 200mm, so theoretically that's maximum magnification that I can achieve without anything else added. And I'll put that shot up on the screen for you now. Now, before I start moving, I'd like to point out that my bags, whilst might be looking a little bit messy in your frame, it's actually here for a purpose, because what it's doing is trying to block out a little bit of the wind coming through. Because as soon as you start to get into sort of near macro magnification, the slightest bit of breeze is going to basically show as subject blur. For this kind of photography, wind is the real enemy, so I'm hoping this will block a bit of it out. It's not working perfectly, but it's definitely achieving something. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply screw on the Achromat lens, and I'm going to bring my tripod considerably closer. And that was actually a pretty good guess. But I imagine I can probably go closer still. Yeah, I'm still about there. I can actually bring the camera to. So I'll try that. Yeah, I'm still focusing at that point. With macro, you have to try and lock everything down as much as possible. And I think that's the shot. It may not be perfect. The ISO is higher than I would normally hope to use for this sort of situation. I always try and keep my ISO as low as possible. But in this instance, we're on auto ISO, so it's given me ISO 1000, which isn't drastic at all for this sensor. But if I put the two shots up side by side now, I think you'll see that the difference is night and day. You know, one shot you couldn't even consider to be macro. In fact, it'd be quite hard to work out what your subject was actually meant to be. As opposed to the other one, there's absolutely no confusion there. I'm photographing these really small flowers here, and yeah, it's a near macro shot, and I think I'm really pleased with it. So I'll put it up on the screen for you now. Well, it's definitely mucky work, macro photography, hence why I've got my waterproofs on. And here I'm using a really small table tripod, which basically is allowing me to get the camera right down to the ground. And what I'm doing is I'm focusing on this flower behind here, and the one in the front is actually going to essentially be totally out of focus. Now, that's another beauty of using something like this, and it's a bit like extension tubes and like any kind of macro, that as soon as you start getting into closer focusing distances, the ability to blur background is just so much easier, and also foreground. Now, the sun's come out, which can be a bit of an issue with macro, so keeping on the theme of budget macro photography, I'm going to use this, which is the humble reflector. Now, the beauty about reflectors is it can do two things. You can either reflect light back in, And in this case, it's got a gold reflector or white reflector. So I can either bounce the light back in, or I can just simply choose to cover my subject. I'm going to try both actually, I think. So I'm literally just selecting the focus point. I'm going to slightly readjust the tripod, which is not easy at this sort of height. I'm going to try that one first of all. And now I'm going to try bouncing some light in. And now I'm going to try diffusing some light. No, the diffusing light doesn't actually work as nicely, I don't think, but I'm still going to take it, just... No, I think definitely in this occasion, I want to try and control the light there. So actually I'm going to try bouncing back. Now, one tip I would say is if you're planning to do macro photography, is perhaps carry a plastic bag with you of some sort so you can actually lie on it or kneel on it. And I've just adjusted the exposure compensation just to make sure. But I think one of those will come out quite nice, so I'll put it on the screen for you to have a look at now. Right, there's a bee on this little daisy here, which is going to be a really nice test actually of how well it can act as a macro lens. Now, I'm not filling the frame by any means, and I'm not sure if I could get any closer. The bee's been very obliging. Very minimal depth of field, but I can see his eyes. And now I'm just a case of trying to get a composition that I'm pleased with. This shot, I'm just trying to get the bee actually in location as such. You can see the pollen on its head, which is quite staggering, really. That's one shot at f10. I'm going to actually try going up to f60. Yeah, I think I'm absolutely chuffed with this shot, so I'll put it on the screen for you now. What I was actually going to discuss here was how having the ability to shoot near macro actually opens up a whole new world of subjects you can shoot. So even if you haven't got the time to get out and go any sort of distance, even if you haven't got time to walk to a local park, you probably find that just going around your own garden, you might actually find something that's really worthwhile photographing. But that bee was a real bonus, so I'm really chuffed with getting that one, and I'm quite blown away that I could actually see the pollen on the hairs of the bee. Brilliant. And the bee's small. The bee is ridiculously small. We're talking smaller than my little fingernail, really. So whilst it's not filling the frame, it's definitely not one-to-one reproduction. I'd hasten to guess we're getting about 1 to 2, which is half life-size reproduction. So it's still quite small in the frame, but I'm chuffed. It's a nice little shot. And the reality is I wouldn't have got it without using this screw-on lens. So I hope those 3 photos have demonstrated what is achievable if you use an achromatic lens attached to the front of any lens you own at the moment. As I say, I was using the 28mm to 200, and I was using it mainly at 200mm. Now it may well have been that if I'd have gone to 70mm, that I could actually focus even closer, because all you're doing is exaggerating what your lens can already do. And a lot of lenses will focus closer at the wider side. So even at 28mm, you could virtually probably be right on top of your subject. But then you have the problem of spooking insects or casting light over your actual subject you're trying to photograph. So I prefer to work from a further distance. Now I think what we really need to do is try and compare using extension tubes with using an achromatic lens on the front. And the reality is that in use it's very similar. Now theoretically your extension tubes should have slightly better image quality than using an external piece of glass on front of your lens, simply due to the fact that you're not putting any more glass on there and you're still using your lens as it should be, just further away from the plane of the sensor. But I think we're splitting hairs, because we get a good quality achromatic lens, then I think really you should see very little difference. And I've been really surprised just how good the image quality is using this lens on the front. Now what I'll do in the description, I'll put the name of the one I actually purchased from Amazon, and I'll put a link on there, a full disclaimer that it will be an affiliate link, so if you do decide to buy it, I'll get a small pittance back. But ultimately, I think for the price I paid for it, which was around the 60 quid mark for a 67mm size, I think it's worth every penny. And I think you're probably looking at about £100 if you've got the 77mm lens. So, you know, it's still really good value for money, and it's definitely a lot cheaper than buying a dedicated macro lens. But that's not to say that a macro lens isn't better, because of course the problem is as soon as you put something like this on the front of your lens or use extension tubes, basically your infinity focusing goes, so you can't focus at infinity, which means if you want to suddenly take a shot of a tree in the distance, then you're not going to be able to focus. And if you're using the Achromat lens, you can simply take it off and then still take the shot. If you're using an extension tube, you're back to that degree of faffness where you have to then remove the extension tubes and reattach your lens. But you know, we're talking a couple of minutes for either really, so it's not really a deal breaker. But sometimes if the light's changing, you may want to work really quickly, and a macro lens is better. And obviously a macro lens will give you life-size reproduction, and in some cases even above that. But my final thoughts would be, if you're looking to experiment with macro and you don't want to drop a lot of money on a dedicated macro lens, which you may not use that much, then really having either extension tubes or an achromatic lens that you can screw on the front in your bag that you can just pull out as and when required is really very, very convenient, and perhaps a bit of a no-brainer. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you again soon for another one. Thanks for watching.